Hello everyone and welcome to Big Rock Moto. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I really appreciate it. So if you were to ask me what would be the perfect adventure bike, here's how I would describe it. It would weigh no more than about 400 pounds or about 180 kilograms. It would have about 75 horsepower from a smooth twin-cylinder motor. It wouldn't be top heavy. It would have cruise control. It would have an adjustable windshield. It would have 240 millimeters of really good adjustable suspension travel. It wouldn't cost too much money, and importantly, it would be made by one of the big four Japanese motorcycle companies because on an adventure bike, reliability is really important. Unfortunately, that adventure bike doesn't exist, and we're forced to choose from the existing choices out there today. Now, this new model from CFMOTO, the Ibex 450 or the 450 MT as it's known in other countries around the world, this does answer a lot of what adventure riders have been asking for. A really affordable adventure motorcycle with decent suspension, a relatively low seat height that's not too tall, something that's not too top heavy, something that has good performance both on and off road, and just an overall very approachable package with a twin-cylinder motor smaller than 500cc. And the Ibex 450 has all of that. So over the past month or so that I've had the Ibex 450, I've taken every opportunity to take this bike out on all sorts of different rides in all sorts of different terrain and different riding conditions to really test it out as best as I possibly can. So I made a decision. Instead of breaking up this series of videos into a bunch of like 20-minute episodes chopped up into different things that you have to look for, to heck with that. I'm just going to do everything in this one video here. So this video is going to do two things. The first part of the video is I'm going to answer all the questions out there about this bike. I've spent the whole month gathering up questions, doing research, riding the bike to try to answer the questions. So I'm going to answer everything that you're asking about the Ibex 450. And then the second part of the video, I'm going to do comparisons between this bike and all of its main competitors. Now, if you want to watch more of a motovlog video where I'm riding the bike and doing narration in different situations, I already did that. So that's episode 1, and I'll link that below. Most of you have probably already seen that, but you can watch that below. So in this video, it's going to be a lot of talking, but I'll put B-roll over the top of it, and there are going to be some riding segments to break it up a little bit. But this is not going to be a motovlog style video. That was that first video that I did. All right, is the Ibex good for short riders? Vertically challenged, as I like to say. Is it good for tall riders? So let's just take a minute and take a look at the seating position, seat height, and the general ergonomics of the Ibex 450. So what they've done here that I really appreciate, first of all, right now you're seeing the bike with the standard seat and the standard suspension linkage setting. So this is how most of the bikes are going to come. And the seat height is extremely reasonable. So let me show you how it is at my height. So I'm 5'10", and in metric that's 178 centimeters tall, and I have a 32-inch leg inseam. So with this setup, you can see I'm flat-footed on both sides, and I still have a lot here. I'm very comfortably low to the ground, which adds a great deal of confidence in maneuvering the bike, and especially riding off-road, parking. I mean, as you can see, I can really lean this a long way over before it feels like it wants to tip over, so that's great. Now, the riding position, so for me, the legroom is a little bit tight, just a little bit tight with the standard seat. The handlebar position I think is really good. Although I think for standing, let me see if I can do that. For standing, I feel like the handlebars are a little bit too close to me, but I could rotate them forward. And I usually don't recommend bar risers, but this bike may be a candidate for bar risers for riders with certain ergonomic issues. So back to the legroom, it's a little bit tight, but not bad. You can see the bend in my knees pretty reasonable. I feel like I could use the foot peg to be a little bit lower, but it's not bad. Now, if you're a shorter vertically challenged rider, what you can do is a couple things. CFMOTO's given you the option of getting an even lower seat than this one, It also has an adjustable suspension linkage, which is awesome. And I don't know why more manufacturers don't do this, but you can adjust the suspension linkage by removing a bolt and putting it back in at a lower point in the linkage, and that'll lower the bike about 20 millimeters or about 3/4 of an inch. These are really, really nice options to have. So I think for shorter riders, for an adventure bike, this bike, and I think the Himalayan 450 as well, and a few others are going to be really, really good options for you. Now, what if you're a little bit taller? So I mentioned the handlebar riser situation. You could also rotate the bars forward. Let me throw on the tall seat and show you how that is. So changing the seats on the bike is super, super simple. So very, very easy to change the seat. You just got to make sure you kind of get this thing lined up. And there we go, seat change. So in the owner's manual, CFMOTO calls it a cushion, not a seat. So I thought that was interesting. So let's try the tall or rally cushion, and I'll show you how this is. This is dramatically taller. And I noticed it right away. I'm like, oh, it actually feels like a pretty tall bike now. So now you can see, I can't quite flat foot. Well, I can almost, if I really push my legs down here, I can kind of flat foot, but it's much taller. Still comfortable at my height, but now this is very comfortable now in terms of my leg room. But my reach to the ground is not as good. And personally, I didn't find this seat to be very comfortable. I like the leg room that it gives you, but it's really squishy, and I didn't really like how soft it was. Just that's a personal thing. I tend to not like a softer seat. So overall, I think what CFMOTO did with the ergonomic adjustments here is like 2 thumbs up from me. All right, so I kind of hate to start out the video this way, but it's a question out there. So what about the tariffs that we're facing here in the United States, and how could that potentially impact the pricing of the CFMOTO Ibex? So the short answer is, unfortunately, I don't really know yet. I don't think any of us really fully know yet what's going on with the tariffs, and they seem to change every day or every week. So we don't know. Could there potentially be a pricing increase because of tariffs? Yes. Will there be? I don't know. You know, this is not a political commentation channel. I don't want to get into all that because that's not what Big Rock Moto is about. So I'll leave my personal opinions completely out of the picture. And that's all I really have to say. I really don't know yet. All right, next question, and I think one of the most common questions I've seen out there about the Ibex is it really capable of handling higher speed, highway, freeway, motorway, whatever you call it, high speed road riding? Is it capable of doing that? My short answer is yes. So here's how to think of it. So first of all, the speedometer on the bike is optimistic by about 7 or 8%. So you have to keep that in mind. The speed that you see on the dashboard as I'm riding is a little bit higher than the speed I'm actually going. So I did measure the actual speed with a GPS. So your actual speed in top gear and 6th gear on the bike is basically your RPM is your speed times 100. So and the motorcycle has a red line of 9,500 RPM is where the red line is. So what I mean is that at 80 miles an hour, or about 128 kilometers an hour, you're going about 8,000 RPM on the motor. At 90 miles an hour, you're going 9,000 RPM, and the bike maxes out, limited by gearing, at about 95 miles an hour at redline of 9,500 RPM. For me, the comfortable cruising speed on the Ibex with a single rider and not any big panniers or anything in normal wind conditions on a normal kind of highway situation is about 80 miles an hour, or about 128 kilometers an hour. That's where I feel comfortable. The motor is extremely smooth. It really does an amazing job. There's no vibration really through the motor, but it is working pretty hard. The RPM's up there. You can hear that, and you know, you don't really want to be riding your bike all day at the red line. So I would say, yeah, about 80 miles an hour, 128 kilometers an hour is my comfort level. Now, changing gearing, there's a lot of conversation about, you know, you can change the gearing because you have sprockets and make the gearing taller. You certainly could do that, But what you get into with that, and I've done that on numerous motorcycles over the years, then you're reducing the acceleration, you're reducing the power, the torque delivery, you're making the bike worse off-road and at lower speeds. So usually that trade-off ends up not being worth it just to gain a little bit lower RPM on the highway. And then you might be having to like downshift to get up a hill and things like that. So I don't personally recommend that, although some people do that and are happy with it, but I've never had good luck with that. So that's why I didn't choose to do it on this bike. I think the stock gearing is engineered from the factory really, really well, taking into consideration high speeds and low speeds and acceleration and all that kind of stuff that they had to factor in. So what I'm saying is I wouldn't mess with the gearing. Next question, how is the build quality on the bike? A lot of people have suggested that because it's a Chinese motorcycle, it's going to be really poorly made. So it's a good question. It's an interesting question. The first thing I would say is don't use your assumptions about things that were the case in the past. We're in 2025 and the world has changed a lot. So I wouldn't base it off of experiences you had 10, 20, 30 years ago. Things have changed and manufacturing has changed around the world. Now, my answer to this is I really can't tell you exactly, because how do I measure build quality or the hardness of a metal or the durability of a component over 10 years time? First of all, it's too early to really know that. Second of all, I don't know of a scientific way to measure like the hardness of the metals of the handlebar clamp or the cylinder in the engine or the foot peg mounting bolt being a certain grade. I can't get that technical because number one, I don't know how. I'm not the right person to do that. But I will tell you this, from operating the bike, from touching it, from feeling it, from using it, all the controls, living with the bike for a month, there's nothing on here that really operates or feels cheap or poorly made. It really doesn't. I truly, like, it seems to be of good quality, but is it actually going to hold up in a very, very long run? I can't answer that. All right, so reliability. A lot of people have asked, is it going to be reliable? Well, again, how do we know? If someone says they have the answer to that, they're wrong, because nobody knows yet. We just don't. Now, CFMOTO is not a new company at all, and they've been building engines and ATVs and motorcycles for a long time. And there's mixed reports out there about their quality or lack of it. But this is 2025, and things have been changing a lot in the world. So again, I wouldn't base your assumptions off of the way things were 30 years ago, because the world has changed dramatically. Look at what happened to Korean cars and where we are now with Korean cars, right? I mean, we all know how that went. So I wouldn't base it on that. The motor, the 450 motor, has been around in other bikes for a few years, and I haven't heard of any issues with it. As far as the rest of the bike, I think it's just too early to tell. You know, I haven't seen anybody having issues with these in the year that they've been out, but it's only been about a year since they've been out worldwide. We just don't know about long-term reliability yet, and so I'm unable to answer that. I hope it's reliable. What about dealer network and parts availability? So to give you some perspective on that, so I looked up some things here. So if you look at Honda motorcycle dealers for reference, right, because Honda is really popular, there's about 1,000 Honda motorcycle dealers in the US. Not Honda in general, but specific Honda motorcycle dealers, about 1,000 in the United States. Now CFMOTO has 600 dealers. I was surprised how many there were, but the catch is not all of those CFMOTO dealers carry the motorcycle line, because CFMOTO traditionally in the United States have been about ATVs and side-by-sides and things like that. So I don't know, I wasn't able to find out the number, how many of those 600 CFMOTO dealers are motorcycle dealers, and I don't even want to guess. But there's more dealers than you would think, and CFMOTO is probably more popular than you actually would think. Now, you can get parts at dealers. You can also order parts via various online dealerships or online parts websites and get them shipped to you. I mean, that's what I do. I live in the country. I can't go to town for everything. It's too much driving. In terms of parts prices and availability, it looked really good. Things seem to be in stock. The prices seem to be reasonable when I checked on certain replacement parts. So personally, I don't see any reason to be super concerned about that. In terms of traveling internationally, I mean, I don't know how CFMOTO deals are internationally. I would probably, myself, if I was doing an international trip around the world, I'd probably take a Honda or a Yamaha or Suzuki or something like that for lots of reasons. All right, is the bike legitimately good at off-road riding? My short answer is yes. Now let me give you the long answer or the justification for that. The suspension is, I would say, above average for a bike in this price category. And I think it's even better than some bikes that are more expensive than this, like the Honda Transalp. Ooh! Whoa! Jumped it. The suspension is really very good on this bike. It's surprisingly good. You can actually hustle this bike along pretty fast in rough terrain. Has pretty impressive bottoming resistance too. Man, this thing just impresses me every single time I get on it. It shouldn't be this good, but it is. Phew! This is a fun, flowy section. Once you play with the suspension settings and get it dialed in how you like, it actually is really impressive. It gives a nice smooth ride, but it's pretty controlled. You can ride it pretty quick and without bottoming out. The center of gravity is low. The weight is carried low in the bike relative to the competition, making it handle well, steer easily, and it doesn't feel super heavy, so you will have more confidence going into those off-road situations. Excuse me. When you encounter deep gravel or soft sand or terrain like that, the motorcycle responds really, really gently and easily because it's got a relaxed suspension geometry and stable, predictable handling, and I really appreciate that. In terms of weight, to give you reference, it's about 80 pounds or 36 kilograms lighter than one of my favorite personal bikes, the Honda Africa Twin. That gives you some perspective. It really is significantly lighter than a lot of the so-called mid-size or larger adventure bikes out there. Now you're gonna say, well, it's only about 20 pounds or about 8 kilograms lighter than a Tenere 700. That's true, and that's valid, but this is lower to the ground and doesn't carry its weight as high, so it's quite a bit easier to ride, especially for beginner to intermediate riders. The suspension does so good on this bike for a stock bike. It's friggin' amazing for a stock budget level adventure bike. The suspension is just so good on this. It's so impressive. Oh, riding so hard I think I broke the strap on my, I don't know what happened. Somehow broke the strap on the bag. I'm riding this thing so hard. I want to make a distinction between capability and ease of riding or confidence of riding. This bike is not any more capable than a Tenere 700 or a Touareg 660 or an 890 or whatever name the bike you want to name. I think some of those bikes in a professional rider's hands might be actually more capable, but this is more confidence inspiring, again, because of lower seat height and the way it carries its weight lower. It's just easier to ride for beginner to intermediate riders, which most riders are. All right, what about fuel range and fuel economy? So I've been averaging about 55 miles per gallon. That's about 4.3 liters per 100 kilometers. I have been riding it pretty hard and aggressively, and I still get that good fuel economy. I haven't been able to get anything below that, so that's better than I was expecting to get. The fuel tank is 17 liters or 4.6 gallons, so your riding range realistically assuming that your speeds are under about 70 miles an hour or 115 kilometers an hour, because above that you start to use a bit more fuel. But if your speeds are averaging below that, your range is going to be about 400 kilometers or about 250 miles, which is very, very generous. All right, why is the motorcycle not lighter? There's been a lot of criticism that I've seen from certain types of people. I won't even, you know the type, who want to say, why is this bike so heavy? It only has 42 horsepower and it weighs 432 pounds. It's too heavy, it's a pig. Well, you're kind of missing the point. So there's a few things I want to talk about here. The first thing is tiered licensing requirements. Now, if you're in the USA, we don't have this in the USA, at least. Well, it depends on the states, but most states don't. In Europe, they have tiered licensing. And so for a bike to be something called A2 compliant, it has to not only be have 47 horsepower or less, but the power to weight ratio has to be under 0.2 kilowatts per kilogram. All right, so this motorcycle, the dry weight is 386 pounds or 175 kilograms, and it makes around 44 horsepower for being generous, or 33 kilowatts. That comes out to 0.19 kilowatts per kilogram. So you can see how if they made it too much more powerful, or if they took weight off of it, it may not meet that power to weight requirement. Why that matters is that they wouldn't be able to sell it to a lot of people in Europe who have that licensing requirement. So that's part of it, but that's not the whole story. The rest of the story is you have to realize this is not an enduro bike or a dual sport bike, and it's not pretending to be. It's not advertised as such. So I don't know why people are expecting it to be like, sorry to get in a soapbox, but we have to get this out of our head that we're going to have these 300-pound adventure motorcycles. No, because look at the equipment that an adventure motorcycle has to have. It has to have luggage racks, and they have to have windshields and, you know, hand guards and mounting for skid plates and crash bars. They have to have turn signals and lights and comfortable seats and TFT dashboards and ABS. You have to have ABS brakes. You have to have a pump and the lines for the ABS. You have computers. You have a bigger battery to power everything. You have a heavier duty frame so you can carry luggage and a passenger. They're not designed to be super light. That's called an enduro bike, or maybe a dual sport bike or a dirt bike. That's not what we're talking about with adventure bikes. And in my experience from having done this for a long time, when you have a bike that's like under 400 pounds or like under 180 kilos, what happens is at higher speeds, like on the freeway or motorway, especially with luggage and stuff, or if you're carrying a passenger, would be even worse, you get a lot of instability. You get blown around by trucks and traffic and crosswinds. They're not good for travel. Super lightweight bikes make poor traveling bikes and poor touring bikes. The extra weight actually helps you cruising on the highway because it adds to the stability and the safety. A lot of people also think that because the engine capacity is smaller, it's somehow going to be a lot lighter. But that's not the case. Think about what's involved there. So let's just say, for an example, let's say you take a Tenere 700 from Yamaha, right? You make the same bike, same frame, suspension, chassis, equipment, everything, but you make the engine 500cc instead of 750cc. How much do you really think that's going to change the weight? I mean, a few pounds or something? It's not much because you still have all the other equipment. The engine might be physically a little smaller, but not that much. How much is that smaller engine capacity or displacement really going to lighten up the bike? So my point is that a smaller engine doesn't necessarily make the bike that much lighter. So would the bike perform better if it lost some weight, maybe 20 or 30 pounds, you know, 10 kilos or 15 kilos, something like that? Yeah, I think it probably would. But what would happen would be it would cost a lot more, because to give you the kinds of materials that would shed that much weight and retain this level of features and equipment would be very expensive for the manufacturer. And instead of a $6,500 bike, you'd have a $10,000 or $12,000 bike, and then people would complain even more. So all I'm saying is it's actually really difficult to make a lightweight adventure motorcycle. Is the Ibex 450 a good beginner bike? Well, you have to elaborate further. The answer is it depends. I would have to ask you to elaborate on your question. So, is it a good beginner bike to learn off-road riding? No. Please get a dual sport or dirt bike or something smaller and lighter to learn off-road skills before you graduate into bigger, heavier adventure bikes. Now, is it a good beginner bike just as an all-around motorcycle for everyday use, street riding, commuting, all that, a little bit of off-road? Yeah, I think it is, because the low seat height, it's not too heavy, power is very gentle, it's not too powerful, you have A2 compliance. So yeah, I think in that respect. But again, if you're trying to learn to ride off-road and that's your goal, don't get an adventure bike, get a dual sport motorcycle, something much smaller and lighter. All right, is it easy to lift if you drop the bike, if you fall down? So that's a relative term. It's easier than, a little bit easier than like the 700 class adventure bikes like the Transalps, the Teneres, the V-Strom 800s, those. A little bit easier than that, but it's still a big heavy adventure bike. And again, if you're dropping your bike a lot, if you're learning to ride off-road, I really suggest, you know, riding a dual sport and not a big heavy adventure bike. But yeah, if you're on like a 700 class bike, but it's just a little bit too much weight for you and lifting it up and stuff like that, this is a little bit better, but maybe not transformational. All right, how are the headlights? How is the bike to ride at night? So I have tested the bike at night and I have footage of that I'll put here. I would say the headlights are average for a modern motorcycle. So not great, but also not that bad. A lot of modern bikes, they have this thing, so you've got LED headlights, which in general I think are a good thing, but they have kind of a sharp cutoff. So when you go through corners, you know, it's more of a challenge to see ahead when you're going through a sharp corner. If you're riding in a straight line, not too much of an issue. So I would say the lights are just average. If it was me, if I was going to own this bike long term as my own bike, I would add some extra lights. But again, I live in the country in a rural area. There's deer in the mountains and I really need that extra lighting, but just depends on what you're doing with the bike. How are the stock tires? So these stock tires have been incredibly impressive to me. I didn't expect anything out of them because they look like the Pirelli Scorpion Pirelli Scorpion STR, the ones that come on a lot of adventure bikes from the factory. They look like that, but they perform better than the Pirellis. Well, let me back up. Off-road, I think these are better than those Pirellis. On the road, I think the Pirellis are better than these, although these are okay. But I was actually very impressed, and I navigated rocks and sand and hills and all sorts of off-road stuff, and rode pretty aggressively on the street and never really had any major issues with the tire. And I think if you buy the bike, you could definitely wear out these tires before worrying about you're not going to have to change them out right away just to do something like a BDR or some mild off-roading. I was actually really impressed with the tires. How is the maintenance on the bike? Good question. So the first thing I like is that they put the air filter box under the seat, so you don't have to, you know, remove the whole gas tank and everything to get to the air filter like some bikes. So that was really, really good. The other maintenance, like your oil changes and everything, is pretty typical. So you have, on the oil change, you have an automotive style filter, and what they also give you is a magnetic drain plug. I really like that. It helps filter out the metal in the oil. It catches on the drain plug, then you can clean it. So CFMOTO is calling for an oil change interval of 3,000 miles or 5,000 kilometers. That's pretty conservative and pretty frequent. A lot of motorcycle manufacturers now have gone to really long oil change intervals, which I'm not really sure about that. So I think that's just conservative, but also you're running the bike at higher RPM because it is a smaller motor. The valve inspection interval for the valve clearance is way up there, 24,000 miles or 40,000 kilometers. That's really, really impressive. So you're not going to have to worry about any expensive servicing for a pretty long time. And if you want to work on the bike yourself, it looks like it's going to be really, really easy to do. How's the wind protection and the wind coverage on this bike? So as an adventure bike, you're going to want to travel on it. I've actually been really impressed with the overall wind coverage and wind protection. The overall design of the front fairing and the headlight and this upper fairing and the windshield gives you pretty good wind coverage. And the fact that they gave you an adjustable windshield, I just can't tell you how much I appreciate that. You know, when you're hot, you want airflow, crank it down. Off-road, you can crank it down. On the highway, touring, put it back up, and it really provides really good amount of deflection with not too much buffeting. So I was super impressed, and I was actually really happy with the factory windshield. I didn't see the need to go to a taller shield for myself. The electronics, are they easy to use? So my short answer is yes. Now here's the long answer. So you have traction control and you have ABS, right? The systems work well on the highway, and I think it's good to have those. When you go in the dirt, for mild off-roading, gentle, flat dirt and gravel roads, you can actually leave the traction control and ABS on to both the front and back tire. It works okay for mild off-roading, not going too fast. once the terrain gets aggressive or once you get aggressive, you'll need to turn that stuff off, turn off the rear ABS, and always leave the front on, by the way, on adventure bike, and then turn off traction control. I really like they made it super easy to do. You have a single button on your handlebar, you hold it for about 2 seconds, comes up on the dashboard, traction control and ABS turn off together, super easy and simple. I love how they did that. And then to turn them back on, you just press the button momentarily. You don't have to hold it for 2 seconds, just press it quickly and the systems will come back on. Now, the bike does not remember the settings, which is a little bit unfortunate. When you key the bike, key power cycle with the key, it does not remember your settings, but again, it's just 2 seconds on the handlebar button to turn it off, and that's pretty easy to do, so I can accept that. Yeah, so my basic setup for transitioning to dirt on this bike is just a couple things. I just hold down this button until off-road shows up on here, and then I just kind of crank my windshield down so I have a bit better visibility, and then you're good to go. It's that simple. How is the seating comfort? All right, so I tested 2 different seats. I tested the factory standard seat, which is, yeah, on the bike right now, and then I tested the tall rally seat. So I found the factory seat to be actually average. I would say for like 4 hours, 5 hours of riding, I was okay. It wasn't too bad. I don't think I would need to change it. I tested the tall seat. The tall seat, I just found the foam it felt really soft and squishy, and I personally didn't find that one very as comfortable as the factory seat, which is a little bit lower. I didn't test the factory low seat option. I don't have that seat option, so unfortunately I can't speak to that one. But overall seating comfort, I would say, is average to above average, like a solid B+. All right, so why didn't they give us cruise control? Now, to their credit, they at least gave us one of the features that everybody always complains about, which is tubeless wheels, which is great because that makes puncture repairs much, much easier than having to deal with a tube. Why didn't they give us cruise control? Well, I think one of the answers is, well, firstly, at this price point, I mean, motorcycles at this price point just don't have cruise control, right? If you look out there at other bikes, adventure bikes or otherwise. The second thing is this motor and this setup uses a cable throttle setup. So it's not ride-by-wire or electronic throttle. If they did have electronic or ride-by-wire throttle, it would be much more cost-effective for them to put a cruise control system on the bike. It would also make the aftermarket companies like Viridian Cruise able to develop it. But as it is, having cable throttles means that cruise control is probably a no-go for this bike, aftermarket or otherwise. Now, as to my thoughts on cable throttle versus ride-by-wire electronic throttle, I would like to see the electronic ride-by-wire throttle. I think it's a much better system, less moving parts, less to brake. It's more simple despite being what some people would call more advanced or modern. It's actually simpler, better design, less prone to having issues because you don't have a mechanical metal cable, in this case 2 of them. So I would like to see that, plus it would give you that cruise control option. So maybe they'll do that sometime in the future. All right, is the Ibex 450, is it enough performance or enough bike for more experienced riders to not be just bored? So I think it really depends on what you're looking to do with the bike and what your expectations are. I think that an experienced or more skilled rider could still get quite a bit out of this bike. I think off-road you get more out of it than you would on the highway, because off-road having 44 horsepower or whatever, it's not really a huge limitation. You can still go pretty fast in the dirt with that. But on the street, yeah, that's probably a limitation for some people. I think the overall suspension package and handling would be enough to keep intermediate riders entertained, especially in the dirt. But if you do decide that you outgrow it, there are upgrade options out there, tons of different options if you go up in engine size and in price. So I think the answer is, again, it kind of depends. You know, this bike, it doesn't have the best handling or the best brakes or the best power or anything, but it has enough of everything to be fun and engaging for the average rider. And I think that's a good thing. Like, on a road like this, could I utilize a little bit better brakes and a little bit sharper handling, a little bit more horsepower? Yeah, I could, but I'm still having fun ripping on this thing, and I can use all of the throttle. which I can't do on a lot of bikes. So I think if you're, you know, if you consider yourself more of like an experienced or higher level expert type rider, I think you can still get a lot from this bike, but I think you do have to be realistic about what 42 horsepower is and, you know, kind of budget brakes and things like that. I think off-road, this bike is really going to make even, you know, more intermediate to advanced riders pretty happy off-road actually, but on the road is where, I mean, 42 horsepower, it's like, okay, that could be a limit for some people, or a limitation. All right, it's time for part 2 of this episode, and I want to get into the comparisons between the Ibex 450 and its most direct competitors. Now, I think it's important to talk about where the Ibex sits in the adventure motorcycle marketplace. You have all these different segments and categories and price ranges. What I see out there is a lot of people wanting to, they ask me like comparisons between this and something kind of random. And I don't mean to be disrespectful at all, but like we have to understand the Ibex sits in the affordable kind of low capacity adventure bike marketplace. So when we say to compare it to like an Africa Twin on the big side, or we say to compare it to like a DRZ 400, I mean, that's an apples and oranges to comparison, so it gets really, really difficult. So it's most useful, I think, to compare it to its closest competitors in terms of price point and engine capacity and features. So with that, let's get into it. So the most natural direct competitor, I think, to the 450 is going to be the new Himalayan 450. I've done a full review video, a few different videos on that bike, and maybe you've seen those, I hope you have. So what are the differences here? So the Himalayan is $6,100. It's about $400 less than the Ibex 450. Not a huge price difference. That's the Himalayan with the tubeless wheels. Okay, there was a slight upcharge for that, but I wanted to give that as a comparison because the Ibex has tubeless wheels. So I think the Ibex has a couple of advantages here to start out. The Ibex has a twin-cylinder engine. The difference in feel between the twin-cylinder on the CFMOTO and the single-cylinder on the Himalayan is really dramatic. Now, Royal Enfield has made huge advancements in their new single-cylinder being much smoother and much more powerful than the old 411 motor, but when you compare it and ride it back-to-back, as I have with the Ibex, oh my gosh, the difference in smoothness and refinement and sound quality and overall feel is so much better with the twin-cylinder motor. Now, as a win for the Himalayan, you can get aftermarket cruise control. Now, you can't, I have to correct what I said earlier in the video if you caught that. I said the Ibex didn't have any aftermarket cruise control options. It actually does have an option from MC Cruise, I think out of Australia. So there's an option there for that. Now, the Himalayan has a really affordable cruise control aftermarket option from Viridian Cruise, so that may be a factor for a lot of you. The Ibex wins on the adjustable suspension. The Himalayan suspension is actually really good, but it doesn't really have the adjustments, and I think I would give the nod then to the Ibex for that on the suspension. The Ibex also has an adjustable windshield and has a little bit better wind protection, wind coverage, larger fairing, bigger windshield area. I think, and the adjustments, I just think it wins out there. The Himalayan has a 3-year warranty. The CFMOTO only has a 2-year warranty. The Himalayan is slightly cheaper. In terms of off-road ability, I think they're really close. I think they're really close. And then on-road, I would absolutely give the advantage to the Ibex overall, just because of the slightly more power, the much more refined, smoother engine. It just feels more at home going down the highway and things like that than the Himalayan does with its single cylinder. Okay, let's talk about Honda's NX500, formerly called the CB500X. I've reviewed those bikes a lot here on the channel. So for the Honda, the number one thing is, well, it's a Honda, and a lot of you are going to purchase it just for that reason alone. The NX is a slightly better highway touring bike, slightly taller gearing, slightly more power, maybe a few more horsepower. Now, On the other side of it, the Ibex definitely takes the win off-road. So if you look at the differences in the wheel sets and the wheel sizes and the suspension travel, the ground clearance, the off-road setup on the Ibex is far superior to the Honda. The Honda is okay off-road, but you have the cast wheels, you have the 19-inch front, you have less suspension travel. It's just not quite as natural off-road as the Ibex is. So you have that. The Ibex also has some additional features which are nice, like the adjustable windshield, the folding mirrors. Another difference is that the Ibex uses a different crankshaft setup, so it has a much nicer, more pleasing engine sound than the Honda does. The Honda, I've described it as sounding like an angry vacuum cleaner. The motor is great, it performs well, but it just doesn't have the best sound to it. So I think these are both very, very good motorcycles. You know, the Honda's a little bit more money. You're paying for that Honda name, and I think for highway touring, the Honda would give the edge, but for off-road, I'd give the edge to the CFMOTO. All right, this is going to be a tough one for all of us. What about Kawasaki's KLR 650? So the third gen KLR 650, you know, they gave it fuel injection, better wind protection, bunch of upgrades, different features. It's a comfortable, solid adventure motorcycle and still remains a really good value. However, when you really compare it and ride it back to back with the Ibex, there's simply no comparison in any single way. The Ibex, I can't think of a single performance metric or quality or ride feeling where the KLR has any advantage to the Ibex. And in fact, the Ibex is superior pretty much in every regard. So unfortunately, I really do think that the venerable KLR is really showing its age when you stack it up against more modern bikes like the Ibex, the Himalayan 450, and others. And I think that if Kawasaki wants to remain competitive, they really need to give us an entirely new model. All right, what about versus KTM's brand new 390 Adventure R? So that bike's coming in at $69.99 here in the US. It's the main problem I have in doing this is it's not here yet. So no one's ridden it, at least in the United States, and we're just anxiously waiting this to come in. I actually have a deposit on one. I was considering purchasing it to do a longer term review, and I may potentially end up getting it faster that way than waiting for the press launch or a press bike. So we'll see on that. But with everything going on with KTM and also now everything going on with the tariffs and everything as well on top of that the US is doing, it's really complicating things. So yeah, but we can look at the specs and we can look at the information we have. So the main thing is the KTM, at least what they're saying, is it's substantially lighter and it has similar power. So the power to weight ratio is going to be a lot better. Now it does use a single cylinder engine as compared to the twin cylinder, so it's probably not going to be quite as smooth as the CFMOTO, but it might be a little bit quicker. The power to weight ratio is going to be quite a bit better. 45 pounds or 20 kilograms is what we're talking about with the wet weight compared between both of the bikes. Now we need to confirm that. This is preliminary. But that's a pretty big weight difference. The KTM has more suspension travel. The Ibex, however, has a lower seat height. Another KTM thing that I like is it looks like you're going to be able to get cruise control as a factory option, which is 2 big thumbs up from me. So we'll have to see about that KTM. I do suspect, I would predict that the KTM could be the leader in this segment, especially for off-road performance. All right, so this is an unfair comparison because it's again getting into a different category and it's kind of apples and oranges. But a lot of you are saying, look, do I save money and get something like the Ibex because now I've got the twin cylinder, I've got some pretty good features, I've got the adjustable suspension, I've got all this stuff. Do I really need a Tenere 700 or a Transalp or a Touareg or any of those? So, I mean, it does come down to budget at the end of the day, right? If you have the budget and you can easily afford to go up to a Transalp, a Tenere, or a Touareg, or a V-Strom, I think you should. I think those are really great motorcycles, and I think you're getting a good value for the extra money that you pay. So it's a tough choice. In terms of off-road capability, I would say that they're both very capable. The Ibex, being lower to the ground, is more beginner-friendly, more confidence-inspiring. The capability of the Tenere may be ultimately higher in the hands of a professional rider, but the Ibex is easier to ride for a beginner to intermediate rider. On-road, of course, the horsepower advantage goes to the Tenere, and you just can't dispute that. The Ibex does have a couple things. You've got the adjustable windshield, which the T7 doesn't have. You have tubeless wheels, which the T7 doesn't have. Now for 2025, Yamaha has given the Tenere ride-by-wire, meaning we should be starting to see cruise control from aftermarket companies like Viridian Cruise come into the picture, which is a really big deal. All right, so I've also done this comparison chart here, which I like to do. It's kind of a signature, I guess, of my channel, you could say. So I'll have this up here on the screen. It's interesting, you know, the differences when you calculate the power to weight ratio is pretty interesting. You know, like the Ibex does okay in this category, but if you look at that, like that new 390 Adventure, in theory, if the weight is accurate, it will have about a 12% better power to weight ratio, which is substantial. So that's interesting. Now, what I've done is, for this, I'm playing around with how I rank things, and it's so difficult to rate things and give them a ranking relative to each other. It's just fraught with issues, and I really don't like to do it. But what I did is a 1 to 5 star rating for each of the bikes in 5 categories: on-road, comfort, off-road, new rider, friendliness, and then value. So like, you can see what I've done here with the stars. And these are the ratings I've given the bikes. Like, I think value, I gave 5 stars to the CFMOTO for value. I think it really deserves that. The Himalayan is really good, but I would give it 4 stars in comparison. You know, and like the T7, I also give 4 stars in value, because just because something's more expensive doesn't mean it's not a good value. There are expensive products that are a great value because of what you're getting for the money, if that makes sense. And the new rider friendliness, I think that, you know, again, it comes back to these smaller bikes are more new rider friendly than the larger, heavier bikes. So, you know, on my ratings here, the Ibex does very, very well, and that's what you would expect to see after looking at all the differences between this bike and everything that it offers for the money. Now, which bike would I buy? Oh, that's a tough question. Don't ask me that, please. On this list, which bike would I buy? If you chopped the Tenere off, because let's say you pretend you couldn't afford that, among these 5 bikes, the Honda, the KTM, the Kawasaki, the Royal Enfield, and the CFMOTO, you know, because the 390 is not out yet, I don't know. I can't answer that. But from the bikes I've ridden, I would have to say the CFMOTO for sure versus these other options. I like it better than the Honda. I like it better than the Royal Enfield. And I definitely like it better than the KLR. So that's my 2 cents worth on that. Now, if I was looking for just a good budget-oriented adventure bike, looking at the bigger picture, I would buy a Transalp 750. I think that's not even in this list at all, or what I'm talking about today. But for $99.99, you can get a Transalp 750. It does everything remarkably well, and fantastic engine. It's a Honda, and I mean, if you want my honest advice, I think that's what I would do for sure. And I had a whole video series on why I think the Transalp is such an incredible motorcycle. All right, final thoughts on the CFMOTO Ibex 450 or 450 MT. I feel like this is absolutely one of the best value motorcycles ever created. You also have to factor in inflation, right? When we're thinking about price and value, $6,400 or $6,500 in today's money in 2025, that is a smoking deal for an adventure motorcycle. It truly, truly is. I really haven't uncovered any major flaws in the Ibex 450. There's nothing particularly bad that stands out about it. Everything is pretty decent and pretty good. And I just haven't really had any major complaints with it. I can't really find any significant reasons for you not to buy one. So you're gonna have to make that decision on your own. And of course, we don't know the long term yet. You know, the bike has been out worldwide for about a year, so we'll have to wait and see and how this is gonna work out for everybody in the long term. But I think it's fantastic that CFMOTO have seen an opportunity in the marketplace, listen to what adventure riders are looking for with a smaller, lighter, more affordable bike that still has decent features and decent performance, and they've delivered it. And you know what? When you deliver a product that is a good consumer fit, a good market fit, you're gonna do really well. And CFMOTO have done that. All right, well, if I missed anything in this review, put that down below. I'll be happy to get back to you. Consider supporting Big Rock Moto and the work I do here, and there's various ways to do that, which I'll have down below. Besides that, thank you for watching, ride safe, and I will see you out there.